encountering the individual destined to become their lifelong companion, the person who would capture their heart and soul, absconding from the confines of societal expectations to engage in a clandestine matrimonial union, constitutes a recurring aspiration, a cherished fantasy harbored by a significant proportion of adolescent females. Carolyn Crouch proved to be no exception to this prevalent yearning, sharing the common dream. A youthful maiden navigating the complexities of secondary education, a mere 15 years of age, still in the blossoming stages of adolescence, found herself the object of admiration, captivated by the attentions of a financially affluent, a considerably older suitor, a pilot of 27 years possessing substantial pecuniary resources, who orchestrated a grand gesture, piloting his rotary wing aircraft above her educational institution, successfully capturing her affections, culminating in their elopement and subsequent nuptials. They embarked on a journey of matrimony, united in a secret ceremony. However, what initially manifested as an idyllic romantic narrative, a quintessential fairy tale romance, would tragically devolve into a homicidal event, a brutal slaying that would ultimately deceive and mislead the global populace. On Tuesday, the 11th of May, in the year 2021, at precisely 4 o'clock antemeridium, an individual identified as Haralambos Anopolis, colloquially referred to as Bibis, was abruptly and violently roused from his slumber, experiencing a terrifying awakening at the precise moment of the aforementioned incident. He was leasing a 2-story maisonette, a duplex dwelling situated within the suburban environs of Glekanera, a geographical locale positioned on the peripheral fringes of Athens, Greece, in the nation's capital city. Babis was afforded minimal opportunity for defensive maneuvers or retaliation as a trio of male individuals, obscuring their facial features and identities by means of hooded garments. Engaged in a physical altercation, forcibly subduing and overpowering him, they wrestled him into submission. These assailants were equipped with firearms, specifically pistols, and exhibited no hesitation in promptly binding Babis's extremities with cordage, effectively immobilizing him. Subsequently, they proceeded to obstruct his vision, tightly securing a blindfold over his eyes utilizing adhesive tape, commonly known as duct tape. He found himself utterly incapacitated, rendered helpless and vulnerable, as the trespassers, having secured him, subsequently directed their malevolent intentions towards his spouse, a youthful woman of 19 years, identified as Carolyn Crouch. The entirety of this harrowing ordeal roused from sleep their 11-month-old female offspring, their infant daughter, who had been slumbering in close proximity. The intruders, whose verbalizations exhibited distinct Greek and Albanian linguistic characteristics, persistently and repeatedly inquired about the whereabouts of pecuniary resources, specifically money. Caroline remained oblivious to the grim reality that what ostensibly presented as a robbery would ultimately culminate in her own demise, her tragic and untimely death. Carolyn Crouch entered this world as the offspring of a retired engineer, David Crouch and Susan Della Cuesta, on the 12th of July in the year 2001. At the tender age of 8, when she was but a small child, her family embarked on a relocation to the idyllic island of Alonissos, the geographical location where she subsequently matured and spent her formative years. The impetus for their relocation stemmed from the mutual affection that both David and Susan had cultivated for the picturesque coastal ambience, the alluring charm of the seaside environment. Commencing from her earliest years, from a very young age, Caroline wholeheartedly embraced her existence in this tranquil coastal paradise, reveling in the serenity of island life. She harbored a fervent passion for both subaquatic exploration, commonly known as scuba diving, and natation, the art of swimming. Her initial encounter with her prospective spouse, the man who would later become her husband, occurred during a festive procession commemorating Good Friday in the year 2017. At this juncture, Bobby's pursued a vocation as a commercial helicopter pilot, operating rotary wing aircraft for profit, while Carolyn had attained a mere 15 years of age, still in the midst of her adolescence. 3 years subsequently, after the passage of 3 years, they formalized their union in matrimony, exchanging vows in Portugal on the 15th of July in the year 2019. A brief period preceding her tragic demise, a few days before her untimely death, Babis and Caroline had jointly acquired a parcel of land, a plot of real estate. Both Babis and Caroline, acting in unison, harbored aspirations of constructing their ideal domicile, their dream residence, upon the acquired land. This envisioned dwelling was intended to serve as a sanctuary for themselves and their nascent daughter, their infant child. To facilitate the acquisition of the aforementioned property, to enable the purchase of the land, Caroline had received a monetary bestowal, a gift amounting to 50,000 euros, generously provided by her parental figures, her mother and father. With regard to the anticipated expenditures associated with the construction process, the couple had amassed approximately 10,000 euros, concealed within the confines of their dwelling, hidden within their residence. The prevailing societal sentiment at the time, the general public opinion, exhibited a degree of skepticism and mistrust towards financial institutions, specifically banks. This apprehension stemmed from the perceived perpetual risk of encountering financial insolvency, the ever-present threat of bankruptcy. Considering the prevailing circumstances, in light of the aforementioned situation, it was a customary practice, a common occurrence for the general populace to retain physical currency, cash, secreted within their domiciles, their homes. This practice was widely regarded as a more prudent and secure alternative, a safer option. Caroline, in all likelihood, shared a similar viewpoint regarding the storage of monetary funds, likely held a similar perspective on keeping cash at home. Under no circumstances, by no stretch of the imagination, could she have foreseen or anticipated the impending events? What was about to transpire? On that fateful day, the 11th of May, a desperate plea for assistance, a cry for help, engulfed Babies and Caroline, along with their infant daughter, in a state of sheer terror, as they were collectively gripped by an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. The intruders, their voices filled with menace, persistently interrogated them about the location of the monetary funds, in a desperate bid to terminate the horrifying ordeal that had befallen them, to bring an end to the nightmare. Babies divulged the precise location where the money was concealed, providing the exact hiding place. The chosen concealment spot proved to be rather unorthodox, a rather unconventional location. The intruders proceeded to access the container housing the popular board game Monopoly and extracted the entirety of the monetary sum that Babies and Caroline had diligently accumulated and set aside for the realization of their aspiration of constructing their dream dwelling. However, their departure was not imminent. They did not leave. Each individual among the intruders continued to perambulate throughout the residence, moving from room to room as they pilfered various adornments, specifically jewelry, and other possessions deemed to possess significant financial value, items of considerable monetary worth. The plunderers, driven by insatiable avarice, desired to acquire more. However, Babies and Caroline had relinquished the entirety of their possessions, all that they had. Overwhelmed by desperation and consumed by fear, in a state of utter terror, they implored for the preservation of their lives and the life of their daughter, begging for mercy. The agonizing shrieks of his wife pierced through Babies' ears. He could hear her screams as the intruders brandished a firearm, a deadly weapon, menacingly directed at their 11-month-old infant, their vulnerable and defenseless daughter. Despite being deprived of sight, despite being blindfolded, he waged a relentless struggle against the restraints that bound him, fighting to free himself. However, the constricting cordage encircling his neck was subjected to intensified pressure, tightened further, to such an extent that he experienced repeated episodes of syncope, losing consciousness intermittently. He oscillated between states of awareness and oblivion, drifting in and out of consciousness. Ultimately, he succumbed to unconsciousness, he fainted, and subsequently, after a certain interval, his senses gradually returned, he regained consciousness. Upon regaining consciousness, upon the restoration of his cognitive faculties, he ascertained that the perpetrators, the malevolent individuals, had vacated the premises, departed from the residence. At that precise juncture, the sole auditory perception that registered in his awareness, the only sound he could discern, consisted of the agonizing wails, the distressed cries emanating from his infant daughter. Following an interval of approximately 30 minutes, a half-hour duration, Babies successfully maneuvered himself into proximity with his mobile communication device, his cellular phone, and initiated contact with emergency services, dialing the designated emergency number. This action was accomplished through the utilization of his nasal appendage, his nose. The instant the telephonic connection was established, as soon as the call went through, Babies emitted a desperate vocalization, a cry for assistance, imploring the emergency services personnel to dispatch an ambulance. a medical transport vehicle, and to provide them with his precise geographical coordinates, his location. Given the presence of adhesive tape, commonly known as duct tape, obstructing his oral cavity, covering his mouth, the entirety of the telephonic exchange was characterized by indistinct and muffled vocalizations. His words were garbled. The operator situated at the receiving end of the communication, the person on the other end of the line, requested Bobby's to furnish an explanation of the transpired events, to describe what had happened. However, the extent of his verbal capacity was limited to the utterance "robbers came in," conveying the bare minimum of information. "An hour and a half ago," he added, specifying the approximate time elapsed. Since the moment of the unauthorized entry, the intrusion into Babis and Caroline's dwelling, their residence, initial responders, the first emergency personnel, arrived at the location of the incident at approximately 6 o'clock ante-meridian. They ascended the frontal steps of the residence with utmost haste, rapidly entering the house. The scene that unfolded before their eyes could only be characterized as profoundly disturbing and gruesome, utterly horrific. Within the confines of the living quarters, the living area, and the culinary preparation area, the kitchen, exhibited signs of extensive disarray and destruction, complete chaos. Storage compartments, drawers, were ajar and devoid of contents, open and empty. Articles of clothing, garments, along with various other personal belongings, were strewn haphazardly across the entirety of the area, scattered everywhere. Amongst the disarray, a container housing the popular board game Monopoly lay open. The Monopoly box was open. This was the identical container, the same box within which Bobby's and Caroline had secreted their monetary reserves, the money they had hidden. The initial responders also located a surveillance device, a security camera, positioned upon the upholstered seating furniture in the living room on the living room couch. It exhibited indications of having been forcibly detached from its affixed position on the walls, ripped off the walls. While the camera itself remained on the couch, the data storage component, the memory card, was conspicuously absent, missing. Suspended from the stairway, hanging from the staircase, was the lifeless form of a canine, a husky puppy with white and brown fur, which had perished due to asphyxiation caused by its own restraining tether, strangled with its own leash. Baby's was discovered upon the floor of the principal sleeping chamber, the master bedroom. His ocular and oral orifices, his eyes and mouth, were obscured by adhesive tape, duct tape, extending up to the cervical region, reaching his neck. Furthermore, restraining devices, bindings, secured his upper and lower limbs behind his dorsal aspect. His hands and feet were tied behind his back. Positioned upon the bed, lying in a prone position with her face downward, was Caroline Crouch. Adjacent to her, beside her, lay their infant daughter. The infant emitted vocalizations indicative of distress, crying, and produced percussive sounds with her hands, clapping, as she exerted physical pressure upon her maternal figure, pushing her mother in a futile attempt to rouse her from her unresponsive state to wake her up. Caroline was pronounced deceased, declared dead. Their daughter, while exhibiting clear signs of agitation and perturbation, evident distress, appeared to be free from physical harm, unharmed. However, the initial responders, the first responders, swiftly noted the pallid complexion of Caroline's skin, observed her pale skin, and definitively concluded with absolute certainty that her demise was attributable to an act of homicide, a result of murder. Baby succumbed to a profound state of shock, his composure utterly shattered. The instant he was liberated from his physical restraints, freed from his bindings, and his gaze fell upon the lifeless form, the inanimate remains of his beloved spouse, the woman towards whom his heart had harbored unwavering and profound affection, the woman he loved deeply. This profound emotional connection had endured for the preceding 5 years, a half-decade of unwavering devotion. Law enforcement officials acted expeditiously to ensure and safeguard the well-being of the vulnerable infant present at the scene, to protect the baby. They promptly commenced their interrogation of Babies, questioning him immediately, predominantly relying upon the narrative and account proffered from his perspective, based mainly on his story, taking into meticulous consideration the prevailing conditions and disarray evident within the crime scene, carefully considering the state of the house. The undeniable presence of a quartet of male individuals, 4 men, was irrefutably established, confirmed without a doubt. The investigating law enforcement officers deduced and ascertained, concluded, that a trio of male perpetrators, 3 men, had illicitly gained entry into the residential structure, broken into the house, while the remaining member of the group maintained a vigilant surveillance from an external vantage point, keeping watch outside. They meticulously reconstructed and interpreted the complete chronological sequence of occurrences, pieced together what happened, culminating in the tragic act of homicide, the murder, and the subsequent hasty departure of the perpetrators, the killer's quick escape. Their detailed hypothesis, their theory of the crime, unfolded as follows. 1. The intruders cautiously and surreptitiously approached the dwelling, the house by way of an unpaved earthen roadway, a dirt road, that led directly to the rear entrance of the premises, the back door of the house. 2. Despite their persistent efforts, they were unable to gain access through the rear entrance. They couldn't open the back door. Consequently, they resorted to tampering with a fenestration located in the subterranean level, a basement window, extracting the security pins, to facilitate their ingress so they could climb inside. 3. Having successfully infiltrated the split-level residence, once inside the house, they proceeded to terminate the life of Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky puppy, a truly reprehensible and inhumane act. They employed the animal's own restraining tether to induce asphyxiation, strangling her with her own leash, a particularly cruel and disturbing method. 4. Subsequently, the 3 individuals proceeded directly to the principal's sleeping chamber, the master bedroom, where Babis and Caroline lay slumbering, completely oblivious to the impending intrusion, unaware of what was about to happen. 5. Following their entry, they commenced a process of ransacking the premises, overturning and disrupting the contents of the room, tearing things up. And they even appropriated the monetary funds concealed within the Monopoly game container, an audacious and brazen act. 6. Prior to their departure from the scene, before they left, they asphyxiated Caroline by means of a pillow, suffocating her until she ceased respiration, until she stopped breathing. 7. Babis was experiencing intermittent periods of unconsciousness, fluctuating between states of awareness and oblivion, drifting in and out of consciousness. Consequently, the perpetrators likely concluded that he too had perished, leading them to abandon him at the scene. They probably thought he was dead too. They operated under the mistaken assumption that they had successfully evaded detection and apprehension, believing they had gotten away without leaving any witnesses. Regarding the circumstances surrounding Caroline's demise, the manner in which she met her tragic end, the investigation revealed that her death was not instantaneous, that she did not expire immediately. She tragically lingered. The 20-year-old victim, a young woman barely out of her teenage years, was subjected to a protracted and brutal assault, a terrifying ordeal that endured for an estimated 6 agonizing minutes. The extensive contusions and abrasions marring her body served as grim testament to her valiant struggle for survival, her desperate resistance against her attacker's cell. Furthermore, the presence of distinct bruising on her lips and tongue led investigators to hypothesize that a sharp implement, potentially a knife or similar object, had been employed against her during the violent encounter. However, it is crucial to note that there was no evidence recovered to suggest that she had been subjected to sexual assault. Law enforcement meticulously examined all available evidence, endeavoring to reconstruct the sequence of events leading to the tragic outcome. But, despite the fact that the couple's residence was discovered in a state of utter disarray, comprehensively ransacked and in complete chaos, the perpetrators of this heinous crime left behind no definitive physical evidence, no conclusive traces that could unequivocally incriminate them. The only tangible item recovered by the emergency medical technicians, EMTs, the initial first responders to arrive at the scene of the crime, was a detached hoodie, specifically the hood portion of a sweatshirt, presumably inadvertently discarded by one of the intruders. Based on Babis's fragmented recollections of the harrowing events, his account of the struggle, investigators surmised that the hood likely became dislodged during a physical altercation between Babis and one of the assailants. This seemingly insignificant hoodie held the potential to be a crucial piece of evidence, a linchpin in the investigation, given the high-profile nature and profound significance of this particular case. Although the dislodging of the hood appeared to be a minor detail, a seemingly inconsequential event, it afforded Babis a fleeting glimpse of the individual who assaulted him, a brief but potentially vital visual impression. A police sketch artist, utilizing Babis's description, rendered a composite image depicting a heavyset individual, characterized by dark skin pigmentation and considerable height, Every detail gleaned from Babis's memory, however fragmented or incomplete, was meticulously incorporated into the sketch, despite his understandably disoriented state in the aftermath of the traumatic experience. Remarkably, Babis was also able to provide details regarding the firearms utilized by the perpetrators. He readily identified the weapons. According to his account, the intruders were armed with a black pistol and a silver Colt revolver, a firearm of classic design. As the investigation progressed and unfolded, law enforcement ascertained that the perpetrators absconded with approximately 10,000 euros in cash currency, as well as jewelry estimated to be valued at around 20,000 euros, a substantial and significant financial gain. The investigating officers strongly suspected that this was not a random act of violence, but rather a premeditated crime executed by seasoned criminals, professional operatives, who had likely conducted surveillance on the family, observing their routines and habits, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to strike, demonstrating a clear understanding of their objective and a calculated approach. A spokesperson for the police department publicly stated that the crime was characterized by an exceptional degree of brutality and gratuitous violence, and that the individual or individuals responsible exhibited a chilling lack of remorse, a profound absence of empathy and human compassion, possessing a truly antisocial personality, demonstrating a disturbing indifference to the suffering inflicted upon their victims. Naturally, in the wake of such a shocking and tragic event, the community was abuzz with speculation, each individual formulating their own hypotheses and theories. As more and more details concerning the ongoing police investigation and their investigative efforts were gradually revealed to the public, these emerging pieces of information, meticulously pieced together like a complex puzzle, provided a progressively clearer and more comprehensive understanding of the horrific sequence of events that unfolded on that fateful night, illuminating the precise chronology and the intricate details of how the tragedy transpired. The paramount question that lingered in the minds of virtually everyone, a question that demanded an answer, was, if the perpetrators' primary objective was solely financial gain, if their intentions were limited to the acquisition of monetary assets, why was it necessary to resort to such extreme and brutal violence, culminating in the unnecessary taking of a human life? Why did the horrific murders occur, seemingly exceeding the requirements of a simple robbery? Some individuals within the community, grappling with the senselessness of the crime, proposed the theory that perhaps the intruders were operating under the heavy influence of powerful mind-altering substances, their judgment and rational thought processes severely impaired by the intoxicating effects of narcotics, potentially leading to unpredictable and violent actions. This theory suggested that their inhibitions were lowered and their capacity for self-control significantly diminished, resulting in an escalation of violence that culminated in the tragic loss of life. An alternative hypothesis posited that Carolyn, in a terrifying turn of events, might have recognized one or more of the perpetrators, establishing a prior connection or acquaintance that transformed a robbery into something far more sinister. Perhaps fueled by adrenaline and a primal instinct for survival, Caroline courageously confronted her attackers, putting up a fierce and determined fight to protect herself and her family. This theory held particular weight given her demonstrable skills in self-defense, as evidenced by her attainment of a black belt in the physically demanding martial art of kickboxing, signifying a significant level of training and proficiency in combat techniques. In this scenario, the intruders, faced with unexpected resistance and potentially fearing identification, might have felt compelled to silence her permanently, resorting to lethal force to prevent her from raising the alarm and attracting the attention of neighbors or law enforcement authorities, thereby jeopardizing their escape and increasing the risk of apprehension. Another chilling possibility suggested that the situation spiraled out of control, escalating into unimaginable horror when Carolyn's desperate screams for help, her frantic attempts to summon assistance and alert anyone within earshot, pierced the quiet of the night, especially with the added vulnerability of her 11-month-old baby girl, Lydia, present in the house, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of unimaginable brutality. The mental image of one of the hardened criminals heartlessly holding a loaded firearm to the tiny infant's head, a terrifying threat to a defenseless life, was almost too horrific to contemplate, leaving many in the community deeply disturbed and shaken to their core. However, it's crucial to remember that amidst the swirling vortex of speculation and conjecture, all these theories remained firmly within the realm of hypothesis. No one possessed definitive knowledge of the precise sequence of events that transpired within the confines of that ill-fated house. Amidst the uncertainty and the myriad possibilities, there was one undeniable truth, one unshakable conviction that the investigators held with absolute certainty. This was not a random act of violence, a spontaneous crime perpetrated on a whim. This heinous act was meticulously planned in advance, a premeditated assault executed with chilling precision and forethought. This was not a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated operation. What specific factors led the investigators to this resolute conclusion? What evidence substantiated their assertion with such unwavering confidence? What concrete details pointed towards premeditation? Well, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence was the seemingly irrefutable indication that the intruders possessed prior knowledge of the couple's financial situation, specifically their possession of a significant sum of cash hidden within the residence, suggesting a targeted operation rather than a random burglary. Concealed within the residence, operating under the aforementioned presumption regarding the presence of a substantial sum of cash, law enforcement officials proceeded to methodically interrogate Babas, Caroline's grieving husband, as well as a select group of individuals identified as belonging to Caroline's closest and most intimate social circle, seeking any potential leads or insights. The investigating officers, meticulously piecing together the fragments of evidence, postulated that the perpetrators, potentially operating as part of a larger criminal syndicate, had received confidential information, a clandestine tip-off, regarding the substantial amount of cash hidden within the Crouch residence. Concurrent with these in-depth interrogations and extensive questioning sessions, conducted with a meticulous attention to detail, surveillance recordings meticulously captured by a network of security cameras strategically positioned at various residences, and commercial establishments situated within the immediate vicinity of the crime scene, encompassing a radius of several blocks, were painstakingly scrutinized and analyzed frame by frame, with each individual image subjected to intense examination. Within this comprehensive collection of footage, the authorities, exercising keen observational skills and employing advanced forensic techniques, successfully discerned the presence of a vehicle characterized by a dark, nondescript hue, appearing to be either black or a deep shade of blue, potentially blending seamlessly into the nighttime shadows, which was observed being trailed closely behind, maintaining a consistent distance by a smaller, more agile two-wheeled motorized vehicle, specifically a motorcycle, suggesting a possible coordinated effort or surveillance operation. This distinctive pair of vehicles was documented engaging in what appeared to be suspicious and potentially reconnaissance-related activity, repeatedly circling the marital abode of the deceased couple, Caroline Crouch and Haralambos Anopolis, in a manner that aroused the suspicion of investigators. This unsettling behavior was observed during the early morning hours, shrouded in the pre-dawn darkness, of the tragic and ultimately fatal incident that claimed Caroline's life, further deepening the mystery surrounding the crime. Caroline Crouch, the victim of this heinous crime, was finally laid to rest in a belated ceremony, her final farewell delayed by the complexities and exigencies of the ongoing investigation, a poignant reminder of the tragic circumstances surrounding her untimely demise. Caroline Crouch's interment, the solemn act of committing her body to the earth, was postponed, deviating from customary practices and traditions, for a full 3 days subsequent to the horrific and brutal act of homicide that tragically and prematurely extinguished her young life, a delay necessitated by the ongoing investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. Her final resting place, the location selected for her eternal repose, was the breathtakingly picturesque Greek island of Alonissos, a place of profound natural beauty, chosen for its profound sentimental significance. It was the very same idyllic and enchanting location where her parents had initially encountered one another, their paths intersecting in a fateful meeting that ultimately blossomed into a deep and enduring love story. Furthermore, Alonissos held a special place in Caroline's heart as the cherished locale where she had spent her formative childhood years, growing and maturing amidst the stunning natural landscapes and close-knit island community, forging indelible memories that would forever be intertwined with the idyllic setting. Haralambos Anopolis, her grief-stricken husband, overwhelmed by the immense weight of sorrow and loss, delivered a heartfelt and deeply moving eulogy at her funeral service, a poignant tribute that painted a vivid portrait of his departed wife, and eloquently expressed his profound gratitude for the serendipitous fortune, the stroke of luck that had brought them together, allowing their paths to cross and their lives to intertwine, resulting in a love story tragically cut short. Well, of course, he emphatically underscored his immense good fortune, the incredible blessing of having been the recipient of Caroline's unwavering love and unwavering affection, a love that had enriched his life in countless ways, and further accentuated his unparalleled luck, the extraordinary privilege of having been chosen by Caroline as the father of their precious daughter, Lydia, a testament to the depth and enduring nature of their profound bond, a connection that transcended even death itself. Continuing his heartfelt eulogy, Babas went on to lament the profoundly heartbreaking reality, the devastating truth that their beloved daughter, Lydia, would inevitably grow up, deprived of the cherished and irreplaceable memories of her mother's presence, her nurturing touch, and her loving guidance, leaving an unfillable void in her life, a gaping absence that would forever cast a shadow over her formative years. Babas added, his voice choked with raw emotion, heavy with grief and the pain of irreparable loss, that Caroline was not merely a wife or a mother, but the very embodiment of joy and happiness in his life, the radiant source of light and laughter that had illuminated his world. Overcome with emotion, he solemnly vowed, making a sacred promise in the presence of mourners and before the heavens, that Caroline's spirit, her essence, would forever remain close to him, an invisible but palpable presence, eternally connected through the living embodiment of their daughter, Lydia, a tangible link to the woman he had loved and lost. While Caroline's earthly remains were being solemnly laid to rest in their final resting place on the tranquil island of Alonissos, a somber and deeply moving occasion marked by profound grief and remembrance. A seemingly unremarkable and nondescript vehicle, blending seamlessly into the flow of traffic, was stopped by vigilant law enforcement officers in the northeastern region of Greece, a sprawling area encompassing a diverse range of landscapes and communities. Initially, the encounter appeared to be nothing more than a routine traffic stop, a standard procedure conducted by law enforcement officers in the course of their duties, seemingly devoid of any particular significance or urgency. Inside the aforementioned vehicle, occupying the driver's seat, was a male individual, later determined to be 36 years of age, who was subsequently identified as a Georgian national, his presence in the country raising initial questions regarding his purpose and intentions. Through subsequent investigation and verification procedures, the individual in question was definitively ascertained to be Georgi Haradishvili, a name that would soon become associated with the tragic events surrounding Caroline's death. At the time of the stop, he was ostensibly en route to the Bulgarian border crossing, seemingly intending to exit Greek territory. In accordance with standard protocol, he had relinquished possession of his travel document, his passport, to the authorities for inspection and verification. However, upon closer and more meticulous inspection, employing sophisticated forensic techniques and databases, it was swiftly and unequivocally determined that the document provided was not authentic, but rather a fraudulent document, a skillfully crafted counterfeit designed to mislead and deceive. This discovery immediately raised a host of critical questions. What was the true identity of this enigmatic individual? This man shrouded in mystery and deception, who was he really beneath the facade of a false identity? And perhaps most importantly, what possible connection, if any, could this individual traveling under false pretenses have to the brutal and shocking slaying of Caroline Crouch? How did this man, seemingly caught in a web of lies, relate to Caroline's untimely and tragic demise? Was it mere coincidence or something far more sinister? Following intensive investigative efforts, the individual in question was promptly and definitively identified. His true name revealed to be Georgi Haradishvili, a revelation that would send shockwaves through the investigation. Further inquiries revealed a disturbing truth. Haradishvili was not merely a man traveling under a false identity, but a hardened and demonstrably violent criminal with an extensive and deeply troubling history of prior convictions for a wide range of offenses, painting a picture of a dangerous individual with a propensity for violence. His criminal record revealed that he was a wanted fugitive actively sought by law enforcement agencies for his alleged involvement in no less than 12 separate incidents of breaking and entering, a pattern of criminal behavior suggesting a disregard for the law and a willingness to violate the sanctity of private property. These criminal acts, perpetrated throughout the sprawling and densely populated metropolis of Athens, spanned numerous neighborhoods and districts, indicating a wide geographical range of operation and a lack of specific targeting potentially suggesting opportunistic behavior. This spree of criminal activity had occurred over the course of the preceding 6 months leading up to Caroline's murder, a period marked by an escalating pattern of illegal behavior, raising concerns about a potential escalation in the severity of his crimes. Among the various pieces of evidence gathered, the most incriminating factor, the piece of information that most strongly suggested Haralambos' potential culpability in the present case involving Caroline's death, was the undeniable and deeply disturbing truth that 3 of these aforementioned criminal acts, specifically 3 of the 12 burglaries attributed to him, had occurred in relatively close geographical proximity to the Basin area, raising the specter of a potential connection between his past crimes and the current investigation. This geographical clustering of his previous offenses could not be easily dismissed as mere coincidence. This particular area, the Basin neighborhood, held a chilling significance for the investigation. It was the very same neighborhood where Caroline Crouch resided, her home located within this specific geographical cluster of Haralambos' previous criminal activity. One of these 3 specific incidents, particularly relevant to the ongoing investigation, transpired in the month of December, a time typically associated with festive cheer and holiday celebrations, but in this instance marred by the darkness of criminal intent and the violation of private property. According to police records, during this December incident, Haralambos, accompanied by 3 accomplices, individuals who aided and abetted him in his criminal enterprise, forcibly gained entry into a private dwelling, a residential property occupied by unsuspecting residents. Their method of entry, a chilling detail that mirrored the circumstances surrounding Caroline's murder, was through a rear window, suggesting a shared modus operandi and potentially linking the 2 crimes. The parallels between the December break-in and the tragic events that befell Caroline Crouch were striking and deeply disturbing, raising serious questions about Haralambos' potential involvement in both crimes. The similarities in the method of entry, specifically the forced entry through a rear window, could not be ignored. Was this merely a coincidence, or was it a clear indication of a pattern of criminal behavior? Following the forceful entry, they then proceeded to continued to forcibly drag the female resident by her hair, relentlessly pulling her across the floor, and issued menacing threats to violently slit her throat, ending her life. During the course of that specific robbery, the perpetrators absconded with a substantial sum of $10,000 in cash and a collection of valuable jewelry. Their subsequent targeted offense occurred on March 7th, a mere 2 months prior to the tragic incident involving Babison. Caroline unfortunately found herself added to their list of intended victims. During the execution of this particular robbery, they forcibly restrained 4 other individuals, including an elderly couple, in addition to the individual employed as their domestic cleaner. The ill-gotten gains from this criminal act consisted of a quantity of cash and various other possessions of considerable financial value. If the established patterns of behavior are not sufficient to definitively identify him as the perpetrator responsible for the homicide, then consider this compelling piece of evidence. He possessed a striking and noteworthy resemblance to the composite sketch that was created, based on Baptist's detailed account and description of the individual who intruded upon her. The accumulated evidence mounted against the individual known as Terroristish Valley included a documented chronicle of violent and unlawful entries into residences, an evident attempt to abscond from the jurisdiction and evade legal authorities by fleeing the country, and the aforementioned remarkable similarity to the facial composite sketch. Considering the totality of these circumstances, law enforcement personnel possessed a high degree of certainty and confidence that they had apprehended the individual responsible for the crime. Howard, in a truly astonishing turn of events, was apprehended by law enforcement and subjected to an intense interrogation lasting a grueling 96 hours, spanning 4 full days. Throughout this protracted period of questioning, physically coercive methods involving the infliction of pain and discomfort were employed in an attempt to extract a confession. He was relentlessly and repeatedly subjected to inquiries concerning his potential methods of arrival at the location of the crime, the precise manner in which he gained entry into the residence, and the specific details surrounding the tragic demise of Caroline. The aforementioned physical methods utilized to elicit responses involving the application of force resulted in a concussive injury, leaving him in a state of disorientation and impaired consciousness. However, despite this traumatic experience, he resolutely maintained his unwavering position of innocence and adamantly asserted that he had never encountered nor had any prior knowledge of Caroline Crouch's existence. The evidentiary materials that law enforcement had amassed against him proved to be inconclusive and ultimately yielded no tangible results. It became undeniably apparent that Harrage's Valley was not the perpetrator they had initially suspected. He was definitively exonerated and absolved of any complicity in the heinous act of murder. As a direct consequence of these egregious errors in judgment, 3 law enforcement officers were subjected to disciplinary action and demoted from their positions within the Specialized Homicide Division of the Athens Police Department, persisting in their investigative endeavors. The police redirected their focus and attention towards a locally operating syndicate involved in organized criminal activities originating from Albania. Initially, their inquiritories encompassed a comprehensive list comprising 100 individuals suspected of involvement. This extensive roster was subsequently subjected to a rigorous process of elimination, ultimately being reduced to a more manageable group of 10 prime suspects. These 10 individuals, deemed persons of significant interest, were all documented on an official registry of known offenders, colloquially referred to as the Red List, denoting their high-risk status. Photographic images capturing the facial features of each individual on the list, commonly known as mugshots, were presented to Babas for identification purposes. However, law enforcement officials refrained from disclosing any supplementary information or contextual details. The resolution of the case was protracted, exceeding the typical time frame for such investigations, and the general public's patience was waning, gradually eroding into a palpable sense of frustration and unease. Given the observable escalation in criminal activities attributed to individuals of a particular ethnic background, the details pertaining to Caroline's case remain remarkably scant and elusive, shrouded in a veil of secrecy. The scarcity of information was so pronounced that even a substantial monetary reward offered for information leading to an arrest remained unclaimed. The residents of Athens were gripped by a pervasive sense of fear and anxiety, living in a state of perpetual uncertainty, unable to predict who might fall prey to the next act of violence. Media reports disseminated during this period frequently quoted expert opinions, asserting that this particular case deviated significantly from the norm, presenting unique challenges to investigators. They posited that if it were a more conventional crime, a resolution would have been swiftly achieved. Certain investigative details that were eventually divulged to the public indicated a conspicuous absence of biological evidence, such as DNA or identifiable fingerprints at the crime scene. Caroline's family members, understandably and quite naturally, expressed their profound gratitude for the unwavering commitment and persistent efforts to secure justice on behalf of their beloved daughter. Caroline's father conveyed to journalists, expressing his deepest heartfelt desire that the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon his family would never again be visited upon another innocent individual. He staunchly supported and endorsed the endeavors of law enforcement and persistently maintained a prominent presence in media interactions, all in an unwavering effort to ensure Caroline's case remained in the public consciousness and active within the ongoing investigation. His proactive engagement extended to the realm of social media platforms, where he maintained an active online presence, diligently responding to inquiries and addressing public concerns, and articulating his profound appreciation for the unwavering support and empathy received from the community. A significant advancement in the investigation materialized on June 17th, precisely 37 days subsequent to the brutal and tragic demise of Caroline. A modest and intimate memorial service, a gathering of remembrance and mourning, was being conducted in her honor. Amongst the assembly of individuals who had congregated to pay their respects and offer condolences, the presence of detectives at the solemn ceremony was observed. The investigators exercised patience and discretion, allowing the memorial event to conclude without interruption, before cautiously and unobtrusively approaching Babis, requesting his accompaniment to the city of Athens. At this juncture, the detectives in charge of the case possessed newly acquired information pertinent to the investigation and implored Babas to assist in identifying a specific individual connected to the case. Unbeknownst to him regarding the gravity of the impending revelation, Babas acquiesced to the request. By this point in the timeline of the investigation, the investigators had diligently pursued a multitude of investigative leads and subjected several pivotal details to rigorous scrutiny and analysis. Focusing specifically on the night during which the tragic events surrounding Caroline's death unfolded, certain aspects of the narrative presented inconsistencies and raised doubts. Babies had initially informed law enforcement that the perpetrators had gained entry by forcibly breaching a basement window. However, the dimensions of the aforementioned window were notably diminutive, and considering the physical stature of the alleged assailant as described by Babies, the feasibility of this entry point was highly improbable. It seemed highly unlikely that the described individual could have utilized that particular location for ingress. Furthermore, Babis asserted that the interior of the residence had been subjected to extensive ransacking and disarray by the intruders. However, accounts provided by individuals residing in adjacent properties contradicted this claim, as they reported not having perceived any auditory disturbances of a nature consistent with such activity. The only discernible sounds that night were attributed to a couple's canine companion, emitting distressed vocalizations, with no indication of household disruption or ransacking. There were no desperate pleas for assistance, no audible sounds of an infant's cries. A thorough forensic examination of the residence yielded no discernible fingerprints or DNA evidence. To further compound the inconsistencies, the perplexing question arose as to why the alleged intruders would choose to restrain a male individual while engaging in a physical altercation with a female. Babies also posited that the perpetrators must have extracted the memory card from the security camera positioned within the living room area. However, data retrieved from the camera itself indicated that the card had been removed at precisely 1:20 a.m., several hours prior to the alleged time of the criminal's entry into the residence. Additional details of significance included the fact that Caroline was equipped with a smartwatch device capable of monitoring her pulse rate. Pulse readings recorded at 3 a.m. indicated a state of sleep or rest. However, readings obtained at approximately 4:05 a.m. exhibited a marked elevation of 50%, suggestive of intense physical exertion and acute psychological distress. Furthermore, readings captured at precisely 4:10 a.m. indicated the cessation of cardiac activity. This time frame preceded the time proffered by Bobbies regarding the occurrence of the murder. Conversely, Bobbies possessed a fitness tracking application installed on his smartphone device. Data extracted from this application revealed evidence of movement and physical activity during the period in which he purportedly remained bound and incapacitated. Law enforcement officials also endeavored to reconstruct the scenario described by Babbies, specifically his attempt to contact emergency services using his mobile phone. However, despite repeated attempts, no individual was able to successfully replicate this action. The ongoing police investigation brought to light evidence suggesting Caroline had made inquiries regarding hotel accommodations for herself and her daughter. On the very night of her tragic demise, the content of a text message dispatched to a friend further revealed that Caroline had expressed intentions of severing her relationship with Babies. Prior to their eventual union, during the initial encounter between Babies and Caroline, he was engaged in leisurely pursuits, vacationing in the locale of Almerida. His maternal parent resided on the island and held a teaching position at the educational institution where Caroline was enrolled. During this period, Babbies projected an aura of charisma and charm, possessing intellectual acuity, a passion for photography, and a comfortable financial standing. He successfully captured Caroline's attention through a grand gesture, piloting a helicopter above the grounds of her school. This grand romantic gesture represented the embodiment of a fantasy, a cherished aspiration harbored by many young women in their formative years. However, in Caroline's specific instance, she remained blissfully unaware that this seemingly idyllic dream would ultimately descend into a horrifying nightmare. She harbored the conviction that they were destined for one another, an ideal pairing, and confided in her familial circle, sharing her innermost sentiments and expressing the profound sense of happiness and contentment she experienced. Babies presented Caroline with a marriage proposal. After a year and a half of courtship, at the juncture of the proposal, Caroline was technically underage, yet attained the age of majority, 18 years, a mere 3 days subsequently. The couple exchanged marital vows in a formal ceremony and established their residence in the town of Glicanera. During the nascent stages of their marital union, Caroline pursued higher education at a college situated in Athens, while Babis continued his professional endeavors as a pilot. Both individuals maintained active profiles on various social media platforms, regularly disseminating curated glimpses into the ostensibly blissful and fulfilling life they shared. Based on the carefully constructed narratives presented through their social media handles, the couple projected an image of harmonious contentment and joyous connection. Their online persona exuded an aura of profound love, affection, and romantic fulfillment. However, the narrative concealed within the pages of Caroline's personal diary painted a starkly contrasting picture belonging to an entirely different genre. Within the confines of her diary, she frequently grappled with doubts and uncertainties regarding her relationship with Babbies. In the year 2019, she documented a particularly intense and distressing altercation with Babbies, emphasizing the gravity and severity of the conflict. She explicitly mentioned contemplating a separation, seeking refuge and solace with her sister, and expressing profound reservations about the long-term viability of their relationship. As their marriage progressed, Babbies exhibited increasingly manipulative tendencies, exerting an excessive degree of control over Caroline's life. This pattern of behavior could be traced back to their unconventional and non-traditional nuptial ceremony. When Babbies and Caroline exchanged vows, they deliberately eschewed the customary practices associated with a traditional Greek wedding, typically characterized by exuberant festivities and the presence of numerous relatives and acquaintances. Instead, they opted for a clandestine elopement, what may have initially seemed like a romantic and impulsive act, orchestrated by the man of her dreams, was, in actuality, a calculated maneuver to isolate Caroline from her support network. These isolation tactics persisted, following the couple's return to their shared domicile. Babbies assumed sole responsibility for the financial provision of the household, while Caroline, immersed in her university studies, lacked substantial independent financial resources. Susan, Caroline's mother, would occasionally provide financial assistance, but these funds were invariably appropriated by Babbies. Within the pages of her diary, Caroline had penned the following sentiment: "My love for Babbies is so profound that I find myself incapable of extricating myself from this relationship, despite the profound emotional pain and suffering it inflicts upon me." Detailed accounts of tearful confrontations and emotionally charged exchanges with her husband were also documented within the pages of her diary. She had explicitly expressed her desire to terminate the relationship with Babbies, but acknowledged that her pregnancy precluded such a course of action. Caroline's written words conveyed her rationale: "I persevered in this relationship solely to ensure that my daughter would not be deprived of the presence of both parents throughout her formative years." Another poignant entry, dated July 2020, contained the following reflection: "Today marks the 1-month milestone of my precious little one's life. It is also the day on which I conveyed to Babbies my unwavering intention to depart from this relationship. The weight of this decision fills me with profound sadness and remorse." The diary also contained allusions to a residential property in Athens, specifically located in the district of Hellinikon. What had initially commenced as an enchanting fairy tale, a love story brimming with promise and enchantment for Caroline, had tragically metamorphosed into a profound abyss. This abyss was characterized by unremitting pain, unspeakable horror, and profound despair, coupled with an overwhelming sense of alienation and estrangement. It was an inescapable abyss, one that would ultimately claim her life. Telephone records pertaining to the hours preceding her tragic demise also revealed a series of heated and argumentative text message exchanges with Babbies, transpiring while the two individuals were cohabitating within their shared residence. These communications served as a poignant testament to the extent of the estrangement and the profound dysfunction that had permeated their relationship. The investigators formally informed Babbies that he was now considered the primary suspect in the ongoing murder investigation. He was presented with an overwhelming body of incontrovertible and irrefutable evidence that exposed the glaring inconsistencies between his initial account of events and the findings of the investigation. He was subjected to an interrogation lasting 8 hours before finally succumbing to the weight of the evidence and experiencing an emotional breakdown. He ultimately began to divulge the truth, confessing to his involvement in the crime. However, the confession he ultimately delivered was riddled with fabrications and deliberate misrepresentations of the truth. He recounted to law enforcement officials that a heated argument had erupted between himself and Caroline on the evening of May 10th, the night immediately preceding her tragic demise. Babbies proceeded to elaborate, asserting that the sole source of contention within the couple's relationship revolved around their daughter, and that Caroline harbored an unwavering determination to depart with the child. This purportedly triggered an uncontrollable surge of rage within Babbies, prompting him to assert that the child represented the entirety of his existence, his sole reason for living. According to Babbies' subsequent recounting of the events of that fateful night, Caroline had allegedly forcefully thrown their infant child into the crib and issued a peremptory demand for him to vacate the premises. He further contended that Carolyn was the initial aggressor, the one who resorted to physical violence, allegedly initiating physical contact by pushing and striking him. Babies asserted that as a direct consequence of this alleged assault, his judgment became severely impaired and clouded. From that moment onward, according to Babies' account, he lashed out in a fit of uncontrollable rage, violently strangling Caroline, forcibly pressing a pillow against her face, exerting the full force of his body weight upon her, ultimately resulting in her death. This constituted a cold-blooded, premeditated murder committed in the presence of an 11-month-old infant. He admitted to contemplating the disposal of Caroline's body, but conceded that such an endeavor would prove logistically impossible. Shortly thereafter, the notion of implicating another individual in the crime entered his mind. He meticulously staged a fabricated home invasion, endeavoring to lend an air of authenticity to the deception. By taking the life of Roxy, the family's pet dog, he then positioned his own child in close proximity to the lifeless body of his wife and proceeded to bind himself using rope and adhesive duct tape. He expressed remorse, asserting that he deserved to face the consequences of his actions and acknowledging a profound debt of apology to all those he had harmed. While conceding that his actions lacked justification, he nonetheless attempted to deflect culpability onto Carolyn, claiming that she had exhibited erratic behavior, becoming increasingly volatile and aggressive following the birth of their only child. As a consequence of his heinous act, a child was now bereft of her mother, condemned to a life devoid of maternal presence and guidance, forever deprived of the opportunity to truly know her mother, whose life was tragically and prematurely extinguished at the hands of the very man she had once cherished and loved. This case subsequently garnered notoriety, becoming widely known as the murder that deceived the world. Babies had cultivated an unwarranted sense of confidence, firmly believing he could elude the grasp of justice and escape accountability for his crime. This hubris led him to neglect the crucial task of disposing of key incriminating evidence. In May of 2022, he was formally charged and subsequently found guilty of the crime of premeditated murder, obstructing the administration of justice,